Bueno, agradezco por la invitación, primero a Betu, a Agustín, al maestro Bousted.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Voy a comenzar con la breve historia de esta marimba.
I will start with a short, brief story about this marimba.
Este instrumento se suma a la gran colección de instrumentos de arpas y pianos en cuartos, octavos y dieciseisavos de tono en el sistema de carrillo sonido 13.
This is one of the instruments of the big collection of instruments of harps and pianos tuned at fourths, eighths and sixteenths of a tone within the system of the sonido 13 created by the maestro Julián Carrillo and his followers.
Esta marimba, ideada y creada por el flautista mexicano Jorge Echevarría,
this marimba was designed and created by the Mexican flute player Jorge Echevarría
en 1989
in 1989.
Y es la primera marimba en cuartos de tono en Centroamérica.
And it is the first marimba in fourths of a tone in Central America. Thank you.
Fue hecha por Altamirano Varela, un constructor de marimbas tradicional de Chiapas.
It was constructed by Altamirano Varela, who's a marimba maker in the Mexican region of Chiapas, in the south.
Y desde su invención y fabricación esta novedosa marimba ha causado admiración y polémicas.
This marimba, since its creation, has created both admiration but also polemics, some problems, and expectation for its radical purpose.
Sobre todo por surgir en un estado con una fuerte tradición folclórica de marimba.
Mainly because it is created in a region where marimba has a big role in the folk music.
Y aunque es conocida por muchos músicos y percusionistas, son contadas las obras escritas para este instrumento.
And although it is known by many musicians and percussion players, there are a few works written for this particular instrument.
Se han hecho varias copias de esta marimba por Altamirano Varela.
There are several copies of this existing marimba by Altamirano Varela.
Y han formado parte de exposiciones y presentaciones de libros sobre la evolución de la marimba.
And it's been present in several books and presentation, exhibition, etc. about the evolution of the marimba.
Algunas de estas copias las tienen los coleccionistas y aficionados a la marimba.
Some of these copies are owned by collectors and aficionados and lovers of the marimba, no professional.
Actualmente se conserva una pieza en el Museo de la Marimba ubicada en Tuxtla Gutiérrez.
At the moment, there is also one marimba in the Marimba Museum located in Tuxtla,
Chiapas, México.
Chiapas, south of Mexico.
Voy a hablar ahora de la disposición del teclado en la marimba de cuartos de tono.
I will present now the keyboard in this fourth of the tone marimba. En el teclado de abajo tengo una escala cromática. The keyboards underneath are a chromatical scale.
Y otra escala cromática en el teclado de arriba.
And another chromatic scale above.
Y así obtenemos los cuartos de tono.
As you can see, that's how you produce the fourths of a tone.
Quiero decir que como...
Quarter tones, sorry, I am translated, I'm not very proper.
Es una marimba que ha sido menospreciada por los percusionistas, ya que no tiene la disposición del teclado como el piano.
It's been rejected by several marimba players because the disposition of the keys of the wood pieces don't follow the keyboard of the piano.
Y puede ser un poco confuso para hacer un arpegio, para hacer una escala.
So when you produce, when you play a scale or an arpeggio, it's it might be a little bit confusing for them.
Porque tiene muchos saltos entre las teclas.
Because you have double the space between the keys now.
Y bueno, ahora entre las posibilidades tímbricas, melódicas y armónicas de este instrumento, voy a tocar una improvisación que es un coral.
Now Maestro Hernández will improvise on a choral.
Bueno, ahora voy a tocar un arreglo de un tema de dos piezas folclóricas mexicanas, el cual hago en sonido 13.
And now he's about to perform arrangements of two folk songs, Mexican folk songs, with using the sonido jefe.
Perdón, lo que pasa es que era en un unidos temas.
The two folk songs were together. Yeah.
El tema es de la sandunga, que sería.
So the theme is la sandunga.
Perdón, el primer tema era se llama Aires de Cuatán, que originalmente va. Solamente tomo un motivo de los pequeños temas y trato de.
Okay, so he arranged both folk songs in one composition.
Bueno, quiero decir también que esta marimba se sigue perfeccionando, que ha tenido un poco de problemas técnicos con el instrumento.
This marimba, you could say that it is a work in progress at the moment, because it's still improving, and it had some technical problems.
Porque, bueno, como ustedes saben, la marimba de concierto tiene mucho más poder, mucho más sonido.
Because the concert marimba has much more power, much more sound.
Entonces, tengo ahora un proyecto para expandir la marimba a 5 octavas.
So the project in which I'm working now is to expand this marimba to 5 octaves, like the grand marimba.
Y que tenga las características de la marimba de concierto para tener un mejor sonido, ya que hay muchos problemas con.
So that some of the features that the grand marimba has can be imported to this quarter-tone marimba.
También tengo el proyecto de juntar las marimbas, se han hecho marimbas en octavos y en 16avos de tono.
There are also other existing marimbas in 8th and 16th of a tone.
y poder hacer un ensamble microtonal.
So my project is to make a microtonal marimba ensemble.
Cómo abordar la improvisación desde la técnica de la marimba clásica a la técnica tradicional a la marimba en cuartos de tono.
So how to approach the traditional marimba playing and to transpose it to the quarter tone marimba.
Voy a tocar una.
Okay, so he will play.
It's other improvisation. ¿por qué he decidido improvisar? Yo soy intérprete, percusionista de marimba y percusiones.
He's a marimba player, a tonal marimba player, he's a percussion player, and why he actually decided to play this quarter-tone marimba?
Siempre en la academia de música nos enseñan a tocar las notas que están escritas. Perdón por los compositores.
Yeah, so the way you learn in a music school is how to play the written notes.
Y pensé que a veces los intérpretes no podemos expresarnos o no, a veces no tenemos la educación para componer.
Yeah, that sometimes because of the lack of of composition studies during the music studies, the musical development, or some performers, they can feel themselves a little bit too tight in the space, in the way that they cannot express themselves, they cannot participate in the process of music more.
Y también a veces o el intérprete no está muy contento con el resultado del concierto o a veces el compositor.
And sometimes it might happen that the performer is unhappy about the result of the concert, or the composer is unhappy about the result of the composition in the concert.
Entonces, con un ensamble que formé con guitarra y marimba,
so with his ensemble with guitar and marimba,
decidimos hacer una música con improvisación libre.
So mainly they perform free improvisations.
Y meramente intuitiva.
And very intuitive.
Es como, me imagino que estoy dialogando con la marimba, que la marimba me da otros sonidos y a partir de ahí empiezo a construir.
Yeah, like in improvisation, the moment you take contact with the marimba is giving you some responses that you are interacting with the material you are producing, so you are very free to go anywhere you want.
Bueno, lo cierto es que esta marimba, pues, bueno, vuelvo a repetir, se pueden explorar muchas sonoridades, melodías, texturas, armonías y timbres.
So in this marimba you can explore different textures, resonances, melodies, colors, timbres. Timbre, you say in English, timbre.
Así como todo tipo de efectos de glissandi. Y hasta alguna melodía sencilla tonal.
And anyway, any tone of simple melody.
También se comprueba que la agrupación de tablillas puede tener muchas variantes.
So this group of the wood blocks have many variations.
Que nos permitan pasajes muy distintos al teclado convencional.
So that you can produce different passages like if you would in the traditional marimba keyboard.
Tenemos una uniformidad de escalas y arpegios en la misma posición.
Uniformidad, ¿has dicho?
Sí.
We all agree in the. We follow the scales and the arpeggios in the same position.
Y por otro lado hay que mencionar también las limitantes. Por ejemplo, si quisiéramos interpretar una obra de un pasaje en arpegio, sería sumamente complicado por la separación de tablillas, ¿no?
So, of course, because now you have double the keys, the wood blocks, so some traditional passages, arpeggio passages that you have on a grand marimba are more complicated to be produced on this quarter-tone marimba because you need double the space.
Y yo recomiendo tener algunos puntos de referencia, algunas marcas.
Okay, so he suggests to have some reference points.
En cuanto a la escritura, se pueden usar tanto la numérica del sistema sonido 13.
So for the notation, you can both use the sonido 13 numeric number notation.
La escritura tradicional,
traditional writing,
a la manera de Java y Wisniewski,
like Java
o Ives, Wisniewski,
Wisniewski or Ives.
En un sistema gráfico también puede ser útil.
A graphic system can also be useful.
Cabe mencionar que el estudio del sistema numérico del sonido 13
so I would like to mention that the study of the number system of sonido 13
puede llegar a ser un proceso complicado para los acostumbrados a la notación normal.
could be a little bit complex for those used to the traditional notation system.
Voy a tocar ahora otra pieza.
Okay, so he will perform which one? What?
Se llama Amaneceres.
Amaneceres, so dawn.
Moment. 2 vor 5.
So we have 10 minutes?
Something like that, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Bueno, quisiera hablar también de pues esta marimba junto con la marimba de cuartos de tono del holandés Robert van Zijs.
So this quarter-tone marimba together with this other quarter-tone marimba by
Robert van Zijs.
Okay.
La marimba diamante de Harry Partch.
The diamond marimba by Harry Partch.
La marimba de cristal, entre otras.
The crystal marimba.
Dan cuenta de las distintas variantes y los instrumentos que se convierten para el marimbista, percusionista y compositor en una fuente inagotable de escalas.
So they make a huge range of variations in the way you can group the wood blocks. These instruments are for the marimba player, percussion player, and the composer, and a huge source, a huge source of scales, new techniques, and chords.
Ahora voy a tocar otra composición.
So the next composition, he's going to play the next another composition.
Improvisación, danza en sonido 13.
discuss other types of concepts. So I just want to go over a few things of definitions first, just for terminology. Just intonation is going to be anything that's relating to the whole number integer ratios. I feel that all of these different terms, EDX, ED2, EDO, TDT, are all more or less interchangeable. I like to use ED2 to designate that it's an equal division of the octave, using 2 to specify that it's double the frequency, to make it more flexible, like as we heard earlier today about equal divisions of the third harmonic as well as equal divisions as other intervals, so there's a lot of possibilities within that. Temperament will be anything in which we're detuning these just ratios to approximate different values or to equate other things. So example, mean tone temperament, which is just singing in the 12-tone system as well as with 19, 31 and others, are the idea that we're going to equate 4 perfect fifths to 2 octaves and a major third. So here's the math of the equation, and it's not actually equal, they're 81 over 80 apart. So a comma is this value that's being removed in this temperament. In this case, this is the syntonic comma. So there's also the distance between the 2 whole tones in the 5 limit, so between 10 to 9 and the 9 to 8 ratio. So the harmonic series is going to be the overtones that are naturally present. And often they're expressed with octave reduction, so you can see how they're spaced out within the octave, because as they get higher it becomes less and less clear. So any harmonic, I'll say, is a member of the harmonic series. And then a prime limit is going to be the highest prime that is made available in describing the ratios for a certain way of interpreting a tuning system. So I want to talk about context of these different tuning systems in relation to just intonation, symmetry, equal divisions and patterns, and tempering, as all different devices that can be used simultaneously together and interchangeably. Particularly I want to talk about properties of the very small numbers of equal divisions, whether it's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on of the octaves, and what this can mean. Sort of what the use of these is in choosing a specific tuning and utilizing those effects. And then differences in structures if you're going to use an equal tuning that is of a prime number or of a semi-prime or composite or a highly composite number, and how that affects what you're able to do. And then I've been inspired a lot by the middle path temperament theory of Paul Ehrlich from Boston. It is basically an idea of describing certain temperaments as a harmonic utility to equate more or less the middle path between equal divisions and just intonation. So I want to talk about theoretical usage of these tuning systems, the idea of optimation, of trying to find a perfect tuning in a sense, how strict systems can be depending on which instruments are being used, the limits of the performers to be able to hear pitches accurately, and other kind of practical things. Psychoacoustic phenomena, things like we talked about earlier today with the auto adjustment of the ear, as well as things of overtones and difference tones, and how many things are actually present when you're using a microtonal system that is affecting what the system is like. I guess I said before, the practicality of performance of different systems. So if we're talking about small factors, for instance, 12ED2 has factors 2, 3, 4, and 6. So 2 is, we often call it the tritone. I feel that the tritone is only one sense of this interval because it refers to a combination of 3 whole tones. In this case, the factor of 2 makes it an exact half octave. 2 of them being together will make a full octave. This interval can also be the augmented fourth or the diminished fifth, and I think that it's important to realize that this interval is more than one interval, because depending on which of those it is used, this one frequency can act at all of these. So the factor of 3 is going to make the 400 cent major third, which is the same as in 12. And this is more or less the mean tone third that is becoming the mean tone between the just 5/4, where the beating is reduced to a minimum, and the Pythagorean 81/64. It's an interesting third because there is a debate sometimes of which third is more consonant, especially between the Pythagorean and the just 5/4, and I feel that that depends a lot on the context. If it is a mean tone, it has one sense. If this 4 is in, or if this 400 cent interval is in something like 18 ED2, where mean tone doesn't exist, the function, it's no longer a Pythagorean third so much in function anymore. So dividing it in 4, we're making a diminished seventh and a minor third that's a bit flat, 6/5, and then the whole tone, which is a very near approximation to 9/8. And then also to notice that this whole tone scale is a combination of the tritone being divided into 3 parts and the major third being divided into 2 parts, which are properties of this as well. And here's a picture of 3s visualized in 15, the pattern of rotating 3s. I talked about the tritone identities a bit already. There's a number of things. It can be the 3 tones, it can be an augmented 4th, it can be a diminished 5th, it can be an octave reduced version of the 11th harmonic. There's versions of the 7th harmonic that are there as well. And so one possibility for a tritone function is a tritone. You could use 9/8, 10/9, and 9/8 to make something that is relatively less complex in just intonation, because at least the 9s cancel out for the 1, because if you had the 9/8 3 times, you're going to get something that is more complicated. And of course, there's many options of how you want to define a whole tone in terms of this definition. So, to going into the 15 equal, now instead of having the 2, 3, 4, and 6, we only have factors of 3 and 5 now. So we have the same major third as in 12. We no longer have this mean tone character anymore, so if we want to generate a scale by stacking the 5ths that are here, we're actually only going to have a 5-tone scale. So the 5th no longer is something that can cycle through all the keys. It doesn't make a circle of 5ths anymore. So instead we have these 3 interlocking pentatonic scales, and this interval, the 240 cent interval, it has very much of a 7th harmonic flavor to it, I believe, and it is quite in between the 8/7 and the 7/6, a bit closer to the 8/7. This is something that is, I believe, can be described by how we're hearing it, because it is the strongest harmonic. Especially in this system, we approximate this to be the characteristic of 7th as opposed to something more specific. So this interval also has a few senses in here. It's the difference between a perfect 4th and a perfect 5th, but it's not the difference between a perfect 5th and a major 6th, as we're used to having this identity of the whole tone. Now it's between the 5th and the harmonic 7th, is more of that. And to demonstrate, I'm going to play a bit of a piece for 15-tone piano, and this is just to demonstrate the sound of 15, more or less. So that the lower register had stayed close to the original tension of the strings, but as it goes up, the tension becomes lower, so you start to get an effect that starts to sound more like a bell and then more like mouth. high register. So that makes interesting effects as well when playing in a tuning, because as you go up, the harmonics of the strings are changing slightly. So you're starting to have more effects being generated. So here's a table of the intervals in 1582, and I find that it's important to understand the different senses of these intervals, the different identities that they can take, the different ways you can describe them, and which approximations that they can have, because if we're believing that our ear is going to auto-adjust to certain intervals because we're used to them or because of the context or some combination of that, something we can use compositionally. For example, if we want to take this 160 cent interval, which is 2 steps, it's very, very close to 23 over 21. It's around 3 cents away from that. It's challenging to describe because we're using the prime of 23, and to describe the properties of that as a set, as the 23rd harmonic, is quite challenging. But one thing that we can do is if we're realizing the undertone or the subharmonic of 21 or the denominator, we have a set that we can start building from the one step being 22 over 21, another step being 23 over 21, another step being 24 over 21, which is actually 8 over 7, which we are often defining that to be. But as you use this interval more and more and more, the approximations start to get more and more distant. So this can be a melodic versus a harmonic usage thing as well, because each step, if you're hearing it as this melodic interval of 22 over 21, we can get to a certain place, but harmonically we're not necessarily going to be there at the end. We could also choose this interval to be somewhere between 11 over 10 and 12 over 11, which, similar to the 7 ones before, we can choose this to be the identity of 11 within the system. And there's a lot of intervals that are here that can be described as an 11-minute interval or something that is utilizing 11, and you can build certain chords out of that as well if you're sharing a numerator or a denominator of 11. There's harmonic possibilities in that as well, and there's alternate ways to describe many scales. So porcupine temperament is a linear temperament, which is a regular temperament of rank 2, which means it's using 2 different types of generators that are being equated. So this is similar to mean tone, in which you're equating the perfect fifth and the major third, and this is also keeping with octave equivalence as well. So this is one of the temperaments that is described in the middle path of Paul Ehrlich. Describes it quite rigorously in different ways that these can be used. And these temperaments can be very useful conceptual maps to understand a tuning system, not just in relation to itself, but in relation to other tuning systems which might also contain this. So what is defining this temperament is it's equating 2 perfect fourths to 3 minor thirds. So basically, because of this, we're having a perfect fourth that is divided into 3 equal parts, and a minor third that is equal to 2 of these parts. And in addition, for example, in 15, this perfect fourth is divided into 2 equal parts. So when we're playing in this system, we can think of it in terms of these symmetries as well. We know the different symmetries that exist in the 5 and the 3, and now we can add this system of defining a more rational equivalence as well, not just an equal equivalence, to when we're playing in this system. And this temperament is supported also by 72 and 22 equal division systems as well. And each of them, it functions a little different because this generating interval, they're going to change sizes a little bit. So you don't have to be using a very specific perfect fourth or a very specific minor third. The idea is that these are going to be related to each other. I think I forgot to play a thing. Nope, I didn't. So we're going to talk about Julian Carrillo of the Sonido Trece. I studied with some of his pianos for a few months last year, and particularly the 3rd tone piano, which has 18 tones per octave. One of his main decisions in his instruments was choosing the whole tone as the fundamental interval, which is a 200 cent tone, very close to 9/8. I don't know how arbitrary it was, but I know that he had a perception that the nodes were a dead point and he did not want to divide something specifically from the harmonics. And playing some of the instruments, it made sense to start to perceive of 12 equal as two whole tone scales interlaid, because as you would go from one piano to the next, the octave would start going from a tritone in the 6th tone to an octave in the 12th tone to an octave and a tritone in the 18, to 2 octaves in 24, to 2 octaves plus a tritone in 30, and so on. So there's very much a symmetry that you could use familiar shapes on the pianos, because they had a normal keyboard layout, so the shape of the diminished seventh would always be a symmetrical scale on one of these pianos. The augmented triad would always be symmetrical, the whole tone scale, the chromatic scale, and so on would all be these symmetrical patterns that you can use as a reference point. But the main idea here is that the division was always of this whole tone, of the whole tone scale. So the idea of visualizing it as this whole tone scale is useful because mean tone temperament is not supported, and in 12 usually those are the two of the harmonic things that you can grasp as a reference point. So when playing in something like 18 equal divisions of the octave, the fourths and the fifths are very, very out of tune, over 33 cents, and the major third is as similar as that, as in 12. So these major triads are not very good, and nor are these major triads the major thirds generated by the fifth. So being able to utilize the whole tone scale as a harmonic reference point is very useful. And with this, I want to bring in a few layers of acoustic effect that became pronounced on this piano, because you're hearing the fundamental tone, the overtones of this. You're hearing the difference tones between any two that are playing, but you're also hearing these kind of ghost difference tones, because if you're playing this fifth that is much out of tune, you're hearing it not only out of tune from the perception of a fifth that you know, but also from the overtone that is also happening. So if you're making a major triad, for example, the major third being something like 14 cents out, 13 cents out, and you're having this fifth that's about 33 cents out, there is some amount of synchronization between these ghost difference tones that is happening as well, and becomes more pronounced with richer harmonies, or more condensed or more spread out harmonies. So I was saying before, the shape of the diminished seventh is now the whole tone scale sound, and the whole tone scale shape on the piano is now a 9-tone equal scale. So you can immediately start to use these as reference points if you could not hear the system, and I could not hear the system before playing on it. The system is really interesting because to describe harmonically through just intonation is very difficult, as none of the low harmonics, none of the low integer ratios are very well represented at all. So to extend and bring it back to the 15 and the 5s, if instead of using the 6 equal the whole tone scale as a place of division, you could also use the 5 equals scale as a different one. Not to say this is something I recommend, or I think that it is better, but just the idea that this is an alternative as well. So now we're defining the tone differently, and we're using the basis of a 7th harmonic as opposed to kind of a weird basis of the 5th harmonic, but more like the 9th harmonic is more present in the whole tone scale, and you don't really have a 4th or a 5th there. And the 5 tone is the smallest thing that you can argue actually has something that has a sense of a 4th and a 5th. A problem with the 5-tone basis is you don't actually get a good 3rd harmonic or a good perfect 5th until you combine it with 12, and which will be 60 equal divisions, and it's very, very challenging to get a more in-tune 5th with a small number in any equal divisions of the octave. The 6-tone basis, it does not improve this 4th until over 100. I didn't figure out which one it was, but it's not at least until 100. So on the Sonino Tracy pianos that have the 5th tone and the 10th tone, you are starting to use this interval of 5, but these are the only ones that are existing there as well. And this can, as we had seen in presentations before, this idea of dividing, you can divide any interval, you can divide any just interval, you can divide any tempered interval, you can divide anything into any other parts as you like. So when you're making these composite ones, you can start to use these symmetries as a visualization and a reference point for the scale. For example, for the 15, you can use the 3 of these together. And to go into more of the regular temperament theory, Blackwood 10 is another one of these scales in which you're using basically 2 of these 5 equal scales. In 15, they're separated by 1 tone, so you have, they almost become a type of diatonic scale with 10 notes. You have the whole half or the half whole scale, and you end up taking all of the senses as the diatonic scale. And if you use a 7-note subset, it is the most close to a diatonic scale, but the way of generating them is quite different, and the conception of it as well, because of how it's generated. I'm going to play another piece of music that shows the conception in 15 of a strong basis of 5. Depending a bit on the context of it. So to talk more of this tuning, so this is almost the equivalent to a mean tone or a diatonic tuning if you want to use a basis of 5. It doesn't really work in 10 equal. You can say that the 10 equal scale is an equal version of this, I guess. It works better if these 5-note scales are separated by 1 tone. For instance, in 15 you have the 2 versions, and in 20 you also have 2 corresponding versions as well. They have all the major and the minor intervals for each of like the 2nd, 3rd, 6th, and 7th, and you have the major and the minor keys, and it's also a symmetrical scale, so these things are being mapped very much to it. And on a 15 piano with a centered keyboard, you play this as if you were playing the diminished scale, the half-whole scale. The modes of limited transposition becomes mapped to the scale already. I want to play a bit of another composition, sort of showing, this was recorded on a 30-tone piano, mostly using of the 15 tones, but sort of with the idea that this tuning can function also as a reference point and almost as a diatonic function, and it does not have to represent a very strict aspect of the tuning.
Has anyone seen my way? Has anyone seen my train? She will try out in her stocking feet in the pelting pouring rain. If anyone sees my way, oblige me, I declare. If he'll send her back in a packing case, this side up with care.
As you can see, the vocalists weren't playing in 30 or 15 strict tuning. The chords used as a reference point, and you can still function with a normal progression of chords And a lot of songs from 12 equal, they can be transposed into 15 sometimes, with exceptions or compromises depending on what you want to do. Having two identities that can function as a whole tone makes converting or transposing a song from 12 equal to 15 challenging, because the interval between the fourth and the fifth, and the fifth and the major sixth, is now a 3 and 2 relatively, so songs that are using that progression, sometimes you have to change it, and it's quite fascinating that sometimes you can use it to change the root of a song mid-progression and change back using this two types of tones. So talking more about the 18 equal divisions, I've said a lot of things before, probably all of these things I've talked a little bit about. So another interesting thing about this is, although the system doesn't represent many of the low ratios very well, it does happen to almost exactly represent the 7-6 ratio, sub-minor third. I believe it's within 1% of that. So having that becomes a very interesting thing, because this is it's not a common harmonic to use. It has a kind of a strange character, but it becomes very fundamental as it's the only low one. I guess this and 9/8 are the only very, very strongly represented of the low harmonics. So you have that to take on too, but also the symmetries that are existing in the scale and their inversions, because we still have the familiar whole tone scale. So these are a lot of the reference points that you can take. And I want to play a track that's using this as well to so to relate it a bit to 72, because the two past tunings are very inaccurate tunings. They represent some harmonics very well, but they don't represent low harmonics very well, and there's a lot of ways you can describe them as a system, whereas 72 equal divisions is very good. You can describe things up to the 11th, or maybe even the 13th limit, I believe, quite accurately. An interesting thing about this tuning is it has the factoring it, you have 3 2s and 2 3s. So you have a certain amount of symmetries that are here from here. So you still have the whole tone scale, the augmented triad, the diminished seventh. You have 2 2 and 2, which is 8. You have 3 and 3, which is 9. So you also have 18 actually within the scale. So anything that is written in 18 divisions of the octave is also represented in this as well. Something that's very interesting that I found is when you're going into this range of very high and accurate tunings, to choose something of 70 or 71 or 72 or 73, you're going to have a similar approximation to a lot of these harmonics, because the difference of pitch is so small at this point. And of course they're going to be a bit different, and the accuracy of the tuning has a lot of challenges based on the perception and how you're going to use it. But from a compositional standpoint, I found it very interesting that something, for example, of 70 equal divisions, you have 2 and you have 5 and you have 7. So if somebody is familiar with playing in 5 equal and 7 equal, which are not the most challenging things to learn, they're in a sense an equal pentatonic and an equal diatonic scale. We're dividing these things from each other so you can have this symmetrical framework there as well, which is similar to 72. You have this symmetrical framework where you're dividing a 12 equal scale. Already you're taking a reference point and making it into smaller points. 71, for example, you have nothing like this. If you take any interval in this system and you repeat it, you're going to visit every interval in the system before returning to the initial. And I think compositionally that's also a very interesting thing to do. It would be quite difficult in performance. It might be something for computer-generated music that can utilize, but it has a strongly different property in that. Something else that's interesting is, and it depends on perception and composition as well, that if you want to take the idea of porcupine from 15 and bring it into 72, the properties are actually going to change quite a bit. So if you want to take this one step of 5 equal and you want to map it to 72, you have to choose between using a 233 cent interval or a 250 cent interval. If you want to also use the sense of having two, I think it's there. If you want to use this to make 2 steps of 5 equal, to actually represent that properly, you have to use this small tone and this big tone to make a 29-step interval. So you lose this idea of the symmetry as well. Not that that necessarily matters, but it's just to show the individuality of the different tunings and what happens when you want to map one tuning to another. So if we want to do the porcupine, we have to use this 250 cent interval twice, so that we're being able to divide the fourth into 2 equal parts. Or, this is not for porcupine, but if you want to divide the fourth into 2 equal parts, you want to use this 250 cent interval twice, and you're going to get a more in tune fourth, but something else. And then a few ideas of what this could lead to, or future things that I want to find within my studies. One is, can the visualizations of these small equal divisions, can this be a way for performers to become comfortable in playing in a large amount of tunings, and be able to do, for example, be able to play something in 35 equal divisions and also be able to play something in 28 equal divisions by understanding the factorization of those and being able to understand all the divisions of 10 and under. And so there's an example of a way that you can visualize this, is visualizing divisions and the divisions of the divisions. It is symmetrical. It is challenging, but it is something that's possible. And in addition to this, the visualizations that can come from the regular temperaments as well. So can this study help describe functional harmony better, and how we are hearing intervals moving to describe a more microtonal voice ceiling and expand the functional harmony to the 7, 11, 13 or higher limits? Does this actually even exist? Does functional harmony have a relation to higher harmonics? And how does this work in microtonal music as we use a full spectrum of sound? And is this related to temperament? Is this related to approximations? Or is this a phenomenon that exists in just intonation and we are tuning to that? And is this related to the prime composition of a rational interval or approximations to this? Is something like 13/7, are we functionally using those 2 harmonics to generate a function, or is that not the case? It is just a sound. So how do these play a role in development of music and in theory? And here's some things that I've used for my own study. It's a good paper of Paul Ehrlich, a Facebook group that has a lot of discussions about these ideas, and a wiki that organizes the information very poorly and very confusingly, but it is there. And some of the writings of Julian Carrillo. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Noah. Anyone else who can show the last picture? Future thoughts. I believe, yes, that would be a great discussion now, if we had time to discuss this. But now it's the opportunity to put some questions to Noah and to the systems of the dividing and the results that were very interesting to hear, that every tuning of the piano had its own characteristic. That's right. So, please, first question.
My question is, are you a composer, are you a performer, are you both?
A bit of both. The past few years I was spending some time with songwriting on guitar, because in a way to get familiar with some of the systems, but in the past year I've started working with the piano again, which is my first and primary instrument, and mostly now I've been studying improvisation or improvisation over themes, because I want to really feel what this instrument is like to perform. I want to be able to hear these tunings for future compositions, and I've started to work on incorporating more musics, more instruments, and starting to compose and improvise with other musicians as well.
It was very surprising for me, the questions that you put in the end. Have you perhaps already found something that could improve our understanding of functional harmony with that systems?
I believe that there is some relation within the regular temperaments in describing within a system tendencies for things to move, as well as certain ecotones. It reminds me of the music of Debussy, when he would use the tonal harmony but take chords from the whole tone scale, and you could feel that the function could move back and forth between those, and it wasn't the whole tone scale and it wasn't the diatonic scale, but you could feel the functional idea of the scale in the tonal progressions, I think. So I think something like that can be extended, but as of yet I don't know how to describe it. I need to experiment more.
Mm-hmm.
I think before this slide you mentioned 5 and 7, and even if they are equal step scales in an octave, they would be somewhat familiar to.
So this is a concept of learning microtonal music that I think could be effective. I've been very interested in studying the small equal divisions of the octave, and found that you start to get these prime multiples. So you have all the multiples of 3, and then you have all the multiples of 4, and 5, and 6, and 7, and so on. And at some point, once you start to get to quite high numbers, you're starting to get more and more composite scales. So one thing that can be done if you want to utilize harmony of 5 over 7 is in something like 35. Instead of trying to visualize it as a harmonic system, you can use those as reference points for the systems. You can how big a step of 1 step of 7 equal is, as well as 1 step of 5 equal, and you can manipulate these in any ways, and then you can see where these smaller tones exist as well. So you can have this kind of mapping as well existing in a system.
It reminds me of, I think, Carrillo, Vishnu-Goradsky, and maybe Ives, one of those a group of founders from 100 years ago that divided the tone, perhaps because it would contain a familiar scale as well as unfamiliar possibilities, and this had a pedagogical component. So I see a connection here.
Yeah, I think this is, in a way, a development on that idea, more or less because I've realized that 5 equal is very powerful in that. So what happens if we include that next smaller division, because we were already dividing the 2, the 3, the 4, and the 6. If we extend that to the 5 and the 7, it becomes another realm of a way to divide and organize sound.
You're interested in 5 equal temperament. It's really there's a really interesting study that tries to analyze gamelan music, Indonesian kind of folk music, which uses a lot of kind of percussive instruments with really short sounds and rather complex timbres. And this scale, there are analyses that because these are mostly pentatonic scales, something that it's something really close to 5 equal temperament. And it usually is, but it's not as constant and not as in tune to say it's really 5 equal temperament, but it's just a 5 equal division of the octave. And the thing is that it's because of the timbres of the instrument, the scale works really well. If translated to an instrument which had a less complex timbre and is really root orientated with a strong fundamental, the scale is rather dissonant.
Yes, and I think also a lot of that music has an aesthetic of having a greater amount of beating so that the room can be filled with this vibration. So this is something that's characteristic of the 5 equal scale. And something also that I'm very interested in is when these equal scales start to have small changes, because sometimes this could happen from an imperfection, something is coming from weather, the tuning is changing, and you can start to have this fluid amount of these different temperaments as well, and it can generate very interesting effects, I think.
As I know, the gamelan music has not exactly 240, but between the third and the fourth step, there's a distance like a whole tone. It comes to a whole tone. Really, the difference is about 220, 230 cents, and not 240. So that it appears that the Indonesian music still contains the fourth and the fifth. Even in Slendro with 5, and even in Pelog with 7 steps.
It's a great pleasure to be here. And we're going to talk about our project, the Microtonal Trumpet, which is nearly 20 years old. I'm a composer. Stephen is clearly a trumpet player. We started talking together in 1998, where we were both at the University of Huddersfield.
In England.
In England.
United Kingdom.
United Ukrainian.
Presently part of Europe.
Hey, hey! Yes.
We want to stay with you.
Actually, I've been learning German quite recently.
Our project started as an investigation of the 3-valve trumpet, the standard 3-valve trumpet, and we were investigating quarter tones and later eighth tones primarily. Later on, it became quite centred around the 19 division trumpet. And so we're going to start actually with a piece of music by Jim Dalton. Jim is an American composer based in Boston. He's due to be here to speak, I think, tomorrow. But unfortunately, he's been very ill, and fortunately is now recuperating, but had to cancel the visit. So it's, I think, a really fitting way to wish him all the best by playing his piece, which was finished last year, I think, and first performed in Edinburgh last year.
No, 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
You were at Fest 1950.
Oh, I've forgotten that. Okay. So, shortly after Steve and I started working together, I was appointed as composer-in-residence to CNMI, which was the Centre for New Musical Instruments, at what was at the time London Guildhall University. It's now London Metropolitan University. And sometime after that, Steve was appointed as consultant for their trumpet project. Now, if you don't know about this project, it was set up by Lewis Jones, who is a lecturer at the university, and Patrick Oswald-Lowe, who's a composer, and he's a microtonal theorist as well. And if you don't know his book, 21st Century, what's it called?
20th Century Orchestras.
21st Century Orchestral Instruments. Yeah, there's a website which is still in existence. It looks rather primitive. It is quite old, but the information is absolutely fantastic. It documents his. He had a Churchill Fellowship, and he travelled through South America and various parts of Europe and documented microtonal instruments. And there's a lot of theory, some fantastic charts, and it's thoroughly recommended. He and Lewis formed CNMI, and their intention was to build a family of 19 division brass instruments. The trumpet was the first manifestation of this project. So I'm going to just talk about the trumpet because for various reasons CNMI was externally funded and the project didn't last very long, very sadly. The trumpet was a Bousted and Hawkes student model instrument. They donated this to the project, and David Cowie was a third-year student, although he was a mature student who had experience as a brass repairer before starting his course in musical instrument technology. It was built to work as a 12 or 24 division instrument, and then with a replacement valve to become a 19 division instrument. Now, there were a few problems with this. Part of the funding was actually so electromechanical valves should be developed, and the fourth valve was an electromechanical valve, which proved to be very problematic, and unfortunately partner institutions didn't seem to be very interested in developing this any further. So, to cut the story somewhat shorter, Steve and I left this project. There was no existing 19 division trumpet as such, except this rather difficult to handle student model instrument with an electromechanical valve. But in the meantime, I'd written a fair amount of music, and I think Steve, as a new music trumpeter, could see the potential of 19, and we wanted to develop that. It seemed logical that we should use Steve's concert instruments and modify the instrument, but we didn't want to do as David Cowie had done, is to change the instrument itself. For one thing, Steve's instruments cost thousands of pounds, but the other thing is that we didn't want to restrict ourselves to one division or another particularly. So we consulted a number of people. George C. Claw was particularly helpful with measurements and that kind of thing. We eventually found that we could realise a 19 division trumpet without compromising the original instrument. We do that by means of a rotary fourth valve, which is built into the tuning slide. And obviously this instrument is here in front of me, and you're very welcome to have a closer look afterwards. But for now, that's a close-up. And you can just see also the extended third valve slide, which is behind the main slide. We'll see a better view of that in a minute. So essentially, we have replacement slides. On the left-hand side, and on the top, I should say, are the the normal three-valve trumpet slides, going from the first to the second, and then the third valve slide. So below that, you see the new 19 division first valve slide, which is shorter, the new second valve slide, which is longer, and then two extensions which fit onto the third valve slide, literally to extend the tubing. That's a rear view of the 19 division valve, and there you can see below the extenders to the third valve. Now, these distances, well, first of all, if you're not a brass player and you can't instantly recall how a trumpet works, the first valve slide lowers the fundamental by a tone, the second by a semitone, the third by a minor third. So if we look at the 19 division combinations, we see that the first valve slide is actually 3/19, or 3 times 63 cents. So it's 189 compared to 200 in 12 equal. The second valve slide is 2/19, that's 126, so a little wider. And then the third valve slide is 5/19, which the number, I'm sure all of you will recognise straight away as the just minor third, 316 cents. And then in addition to that, we have a 19 division valve of 63 cents. Now this has a huge advantage. If you are a brass player and you're thinking about this kind of thing, your fingerings will be almost completely transferable. So if we take a natural pitch, to change that pitch to 1/19 lower, we use the 19 division valve, the 19 valve. If we want to raise a natural note by a 19th, then we use the normal fingering for a semitone higher. So if it's a D, we can use a D sharp or an E flat fingering, depending on context. So actually, 19 becomes a remarkably straightforward system to take on board. It's a huge investment for any player to do this, and it takes time. The notations is standard. Well, I think it's fair to say standard phone notations. So we use the sharps and the flats at different pitches. And this instrument, we use these B-flat instruments to build the 19 division trumpet. So the note B-flat in the chart below, you'll see a sounding C. The stave at the bottom is the written pitch. So a written C, is a sounding B-flat at concert pitch. So if you want to use this instrument with other instruments, that's how you would set it up. So the rest of the chart is actually, it's a practice aid for the trumpeter. So you can see how the notes deviate from 12 division on a standard tuning meter, which is obviously it's just one of many resources we've created which help the trumpeter gain confidence in this tuning system. As I've said, we were influenced by CNMI in this respect. I was very familiar with Joseph Yass's work previously, and although probably his theory of evolving tonality, his work, which basically he suggests that 19 could take over from 12 as a normal tuning, as 12 took over from 5. There's not a lot of evidence to show that that's going to happen, but it's a really interesting treatise, and that was an inspiration. But also the fact that 19 is a version of third common mean tone tuning from the 16th century was something of interest. So in third common mean tone, we divide the syntonic comma into 3, and we deduct that from the pure fifth to give our compromised mean tone fifth of 695 cents. And that is an incomplete cycle, the 19 mean tone cycle, but to round it up so it's a complete cycle is just a question of 1 cent difference. So, to be honest, particularly as we're dealing with acoustic instruments, then it makes perfect sense to just equalise the division and make it 19. For the composer, there are 3, I think, significant features of 19 division. Certainly, one is that the thirds and sixths are closer to pure intervals than in 12 division. The major second is divided into 3 parts rather than 2. So, for example, you can create something which sounds very much like a major scale, with typical sort of slightly jangly mean-toned harmonies, but you can transpose that once and then again within the space of a tone. So it's got lots of diatonic possibilities, but also if you keep going around the cycle, you get a number of neutral intervals, quarter tone intervals, and there's a separate diminished fifth and augmented fourth. So the harmonic resources of 19 are very interesting. In this chart, the yellow bands equate to nearest to 12. So you can follow that through, for example, F to G to A to B flat to C to D to E is more or less a major scale. We're going to play some more music, we'll see this, and the first of these is a piece for 19 division trumpet and electronics by Elizabeth Adams. Just going to have to come out of this.
Elizabeth is based in New York. She did some studies in Basel on the course with Georges Aplegis, I think at that point, the scale class there. He may have been there as well, which influenced her microtonal work. One of the interesting things about this piece is not just concerned with microtonality, but also with extended playing techniques, half valve, and also the various 1/3, 2/3 valve possibilities of the rotary valve. Flutter tone, split tone. Singing and playing. All colours which also affect pitch. Okay.
So we're going to go straight on to another unaccompanied piece in 19 division, much more melodic, very interesting piece, I think, by Casey Hale, who also was hoping to be here, but due to family commitments couldn't make it. So this is 4 aspects. The trumpet is naturally a microtonal instrument, so I'm going to sort of take you back now to how we started thinking about this 20 years ago. The open position of the trumpet, that is without any valves depressed, produce a harmonic series which is perfectly in tune. You'll notice that there's no fundamental, there's no first harmonic, and that's just a quirk of the instrument design and the bore and to do with the flare of the bell and so on. You can produce a harmonic on the horn, but you can't on the trumpet.
It's too short.
I didn't want to be rude. Okay. So, when you press a valve down, it produces another harmonic series. So if you press the first valve, then you get if you press the second valve, which is a semitone, you get a semitone lower. The first valve, which is a tone, you get a tone lower, and so on. And harmonic series is produced from each of those, let's say, fundamental pitches. It's the same letter name, at least. Now, as more valves are depressed, more harmonics are available. And you will see that there are quite a lot of options when you look at the higher notes. There becomes a range of options. So, for example, if you take an F sharp and a G flat, you can see some options there which are differently tuned. Now, the other thing is that once you add valves, so these last four series, as you add the valves, the whole trumpet gets sharper. And if you put down the first, second and third valves, that series will be a quarter tone sharp, more or less. So you can probably see where we're going with this. What Steve and I did was to try out, or specifically Steve tried them out, something like 274 potentially different fingerings for the trumpet. Now, and we've quantified these into a chart, which I'll show you in a minute. Why then doesn't the trumpet just generally sound out of tune? Well, the reason is that modern trumpets are fitted with movable slides. There's one attached to the first valve slide, and there's one attached to the third valve slide. The first valve slide can lower the pitch by around a quarter tone, and the third valve slide by around a tone, depending on the instrument. So we've got sharper and flatter alternative fingerings from the different valve positions, and we've got the slides. And occasionally we've got the use of the lip or the jaw to get things into tune. But the use of the lip or the jaw is very, very tiring for the player, particularly in the upper register. So with this in mind, we formed a quarter-tone chart, a quarter-tone fingering chart, which, as you see, has many different options for each fingering, which is clearly a very useful thing for the trumpet player. In particular contexts, one fingering might be more useful than another. We did all that on the three-valve trumpet. Now, I wrote some studies for Steve to play on the three-valve trumpet. There were some problems. Moving the valve slides at speeds. Speed is obviously is a fairly cumbersome process. It causes coordination problems, and occasionally it can cause airlocks in the instrument itself. So we moved to a position which we already knew really, but we wanted to take it as far as we could, that a fourth valve was a very good idea. And we knew also that this wasn't a new idea. On the left-hand side, you see a slightly younger version of Steve in Prague, trying out Haber's quarter-tone trumpet. This is a piston valve trumpet, which is in the rotary valve trumpet in the Prague Music Museum. In the middle So that was built in 1932, I think, for Harbour's Opera Matka. There were 2 trumpets built originally, although one only survived. In the middle, in black and white, is Don Ellis, and Don Ellis was a jazz trumpeter. He ran the Don Ellis Jazz Band. His recordings are highly recommended. At one time, his jazz band had 4 quarter-tone trumpets in the trumpet section. He commissioned with Holton, the American brass manufacturer, a 4-valve trumpet in the 1960s, which was produced for quite a long time and is still actually in use, mainly in jazz circles. And on the right-hand side is Marco Blau with his double bell trumpet, which is basically a sort of kit trumpet, can have various manifestations, one of which is a quarter-tone valve. So we knew this was possible. There are quite a lot of trumpets out there. There are even more, some 15 years later, which are commercially available as quarter-tone trumpets. Mostly the cost is around £3,000. They're expensive instruments. We wanted to find something which was flexible, which wouldn't be restricted to quarter tones, and which would preserve Steve's concert C trumpet without being modified. And so we came up with this system through a bit of a process, and in the end we worked with a brass repairer. We came up with this system of the rotary valve, which is in the main tuning slide. It's operated by a trigger, and you'll see this in operation very shortly. One of the big problems with this slide was getting it into tune. The 63 cent 19 division valve was pretty easy to tune, but it was really difficult getting this interval small enough. So when it comes to eighth tones, which we're also interested in, at the moment that we can't find a way to make an eighth tone valve. It's too difficult to bend the tubing. So eighth tones are produced in most cases with the slide and sometimes with the lip or the jaw, but as I've said, that's difficult. But they are easier with a quarter-tone valve simply because the valve will produce the quarter tones. These are the notations we use. We're not making any big claim for those notations, right or wrong. We try to keep them simple, and we use notations which are generally available in software engraving programs. So Steve's going to play a piece now of mine, which he's going to introduce, and I'm just going to set up the electronics.
So I think this is the only piece of Donald's that uses a German title. I don't know why. It uses as sort of electronic material 2 stories from an interview that I made with my father, who at that time health was getting progressively worse, and I wanted to preserve something of his story. The important thing to say is that obviously my father's speaking a dialect of English. He's not speaking the Queen's English. So what I'm speaking now, I'm working very hard at myself. And so he doesn't say head, he says ed. He doesn't say hat, he says at. So hopefully that's enough for you to be able to understand what he's talking about. The first story is about how he first learned to play his very first beginnings of playing the cornet, which is a smaller trumpet, and the second story is a bit later when he was a teenager and he played. The band went to play at a fair in Manchester. Now, go ahead and sing. Probably the explanation is longer than the piece, but sometimes it happens that way.
He gave me a cornet, to work out how to do scales and everything. So when I was nearly every week, I had to go down to Mr. Orchestra down secondings to have the mark solely because I had to break off. Nearly every week that I did. Until they could come up with a decent point. Then, after that, I was in the teens, when this story comes. There was three of us. There was Raymond Longstaff and Graham. We went up on the big wheel. And we had a small hat, it was only size 6. It was all packed for newspaper, time, so I thought to take that off. I had to tackle this little wheel. I lost my hat. And the bandsman found it at another part of Bellevue. They picked it up and wondered what Charles Altoft's hat was doing on the floor. And yeah, that's funny was that.
As a composer, I've been interested in microtones since my early 20s. In recent years, I've been more and more interested in combining different tonalities in a polymicrotonal setting. I did a PhD, and in my PhD, which was largely concerned with composition, I I concluded with a speculative chapter about how one might combine different divisions. But I didn't really know how to take this forward as a composer for a number of years. But in the last 3 or 4 years, hopefully I have a little bit. So Soft, which we're about to perform, is a multimedia work. It's a video piece based on photographs, which I took. It's based on a 13-note scale and a 22-note scale, which, as you see, repeat at the minor septimal tritone. These scales have been quantized, which I used a program called Little Miss Scale of them, and basically I quantized these equal divisions to nearest just interval. But there's also present a scale which is based on 10 equal divisions of the just major third. So that's equal steps of 38 cents. Now, the one thing that these different scales have in common is a shared tonic, but nothing more. And I really like this idea of playing with these colours and textures which are created by very stable just intervals and then these rather sort of irritating dissonances which one can play with. The piece was written for flugelhorn, but for various travel reasons we're doing it on a trumpet today. So the fact that it was written for a flugelhorn brings a quite nice symmetry to the project, because the flugelhorn that Steve's using is a 3-valve instrument. Steve's actually using his quarter-tone trumpet. The flugelhorn part is written in 8th tones, but the player is asked to respond to the tuning of the backing track. So that's the idea. So this is Soft, and please bear with me for a second while I just prepare. So the concept there is looking close, and what I've tried to do in recent works is to marry a shared concept, both visually and in terms of sound. I'd just like to tell you briefly what we've done in the last 20 years, or near enough. We have an online book which at various points has been available. Right now, sorry, I'll just have to come out of there. Here it is. We've made a final version, and it will be a final version, and it will be available in a week or two, hopefully. So this is called the Microtonal Trumpet, and that's what it's got in it. We describe how we've made the valve mechanisms, so all that information is completely free to anyone who would like. If anyone would like to make a quarter tone or a 19 division trumpet based on this principle, all the information is in the book, and that's free for you to download. The microtonal trumpet is a resource, really, for learning the microtonal trumpet in 24, 48 and 19 divisions. It's based on 24 microtonal studies, which I wrote probably about 15 years ago, which Steve has recorded. So there's a book of studies, a hard copy, and downloadable tracks. Steve's recording of the 24 studies, and they are for sale from a site called Tutti. But apart from that, everything is free. The Yasser collection similarly is a CD, which is available online. 19 pieces in 19 divisions by 17 composers, and we're presently working on the Yasser collection Part 2, which will also be a CD release. We're aiming for perhaps next year, late next year, or certainly the year after. Steve and I run microtonal projects, which runs Euro Microfest. We have a website which is, as you see, microtonalprojects.com, and on that we have the microtonal trumpet. All we would ask of you, if you're interested to receive the information, is you send us your name and email, and we will put you on a mailing list. We will then send you a link to our Dropbox folder, which has various things on it. It has the book, the free book. It's not there at the moment, but it will be there in a couple of weeks. And it has some information about Steve's visit to the museum in Prague. It has fingering charts in 48 division, 24 division and 19 division, together with glissandi and trill charts in 24 division, interval lookup charts, and a full repertoire list of all microtonal music for the trumpet, which is now pretty much up to date. That's the 19 division lookup chart. So if you're starting off as a 19 division trumpeter and you want to check an interval, you can do that very quickly with the use of this chart. It's a very small portion of the glissandi chart. If you'd like to do the same for microtonal projects, we've got a growing archive of our work over the years, including 4 UK Microfests, which preceded the Euro Microfest. There's quite a lot of video work up there, recordings, and so on. You can see us on Facebook, and if you go to Tutti, you can download the studies or buy our stuff. Those are some of the composers who've written for the project. I'm afraid that list is very out of date. It's probably at least 3 years out of date. But it's a growing number of people who've written for this instrument. And we sincerely hope there will be more. Steve is going to finish with his piece, Rasp.
expect there are questions for the last piece, perhaps. The others.
I like your belt. How do you make it?
Yes, that's it's available online at. No, actually, one of my main teachers when I finished university was Martin Stockhausen, and I worked a lot on Stockhausen's music, and you need a mute belt for his work because there's quick changes and you're walking around. My dad went to the last saddler, still working in our county, and with the measurements of all my mutes, and this saddler made them, and it's probably over 10 years ago, maybe even 20 years ago, so I don't know if the saddler's still in business, thank you. Yeah.
No other questions for the tunings, especially the technique of the 19th tone trumpet. I think that's most interesting and how it functions. As I see, it's a valve that is the turning.
Yes, a rotary valve. Yeah, as Don said, it's built into the main tuning slide. The same here. This is the quarter tone trumpet, but the same principle. It's the same principle that the one step is an additional valve built onto a tuning slide, which I can exchange.
And to play it with the string here, so it's your invention.
No, it's the guys that I work with in Music House and Fibers.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, very good idea. Yeah. Sometimes some of the quarter tone instruments that are made fitted with valves here, this part is metal and it makes a sound. But this makes
a sound.
The metal. Under this one is metal. Yeah. But this doesn't have sound. So yeah.
Thank you. Audience questions, please.
You mentioned the Marco Blau trumpet. How similar and how close is it to yours? Does it have a double bell and so forth?
No, I don't have a double bell. I have a problem that I actually have to be very careful how much weight I add to the instrument right now. It does add obviously a quite considerable weight to having a bell. He has an additional valve built here, and then the valve, the extra bell tube comes out of there, and actually it can be pointing this way. He can also move it, it goes behind. His quarter tone valve lever is, you can see my valve, the valve is built onto the slide, and he has a lever actually built onto the tube as well. And it was interesting the last time that we really met together, quite some years ago, and we swapped instruments, and he was saying, "Oh yeah, I prefer your method here," and I was saying, "I prefer yours." Yeah. So in principle, it's the same idea to build it on the tuning slide, but he can take his trumpet completely apart. It's like a piece of Lego, you know. You can really, and I like to have something to hold that I know is not going to fall to pieces when I squeeze it a bit too much.
But there are other systems which are just as effective as this. We're not saying that this is the most effective system. I met with Nassim Malouf, who's a very, very good trumpet player. He studied with, who was that?
Maurice André.
Maurice André, and that's ilk, yeah, he sort of plays with this amazingly full tone.
Ibrahim, Nassim's his son.
That's right, Ibrahim, yeah. And he worked with Selma on developing a 4-valve trumpet. I went to his house just outside Paris, and he's got a room full of all the prototypes. It's amazing. And this trumpet that they ended up with is a superb instrument, which Nassim Malouf now plays, I think. He also plays other 4-valve trumpet.
Placing a Van Laar.
But about the time we were starting to think along these lines, I wrote to Selma and I said, I've seen this instrument. Will you make another one? And they weren't interested. So it's a real graveyard of great work, actually, the microtonal trumpet. There's a lot of things which have been developed to a very high standard and then disregarded for one reason or another.
And the Selma instrument was actually 4 piston valves,
Yeah.
and I think it's the valve stuck out this way maybe, and I think he likes to play it with his little pinky. Yeah.
But this system could be a 17 division system or a 15 division system. You just need to work out the valve lengths,
the valve slide
lengths, and have them built. But this is the only 19 division trumpet player in the world. And
it's a bit lonely.
It's taken, to be fair, it's taken a long time to get on top of all the things
it took 10 years to start with.
That involves, reading pitches which are different to the pitches you're used to playing. As you're brought up as a trumpeter playing 12 division music. Although I said there's a lot that you can relate in terms of fingerings, it's still a mammoth job. So to ask someone, or the same person, ideally we'll ask a different person, to be a 17 division trumpeter, but it's possible using the same system and just temporarily modifying the trumpet and not rather than permanently modifying it.
Question?
No question, but actually now that you mentioned Marco Brown, do you know that he also has a piece about his father and he composed it when he was sick and it's about with the native language? So
yes.
Was there an influence or?
No. This piece of Marco's is on, I think it's on a CD of his. Sorry?
Yeah.
I think maybe some Angels, the last CD, or the one before, Red, or whatever it's called. No, because when I was having lessons with Marco Stockhaus and then also living in Berlin, that was the time when I had a lot of contact with Marco. But since actually last 10 years, I've hardly seen him. But I'm aware of the piece. And Marco has a piece in 17 division. He plays it on a slide trumpet. 17. Yeah, it's interesting,
Stephen, is there a third comma mean-tone organ in Europe with which you could do a early music recital?
There must be. There was an Italian guy, Dario Cicero, who was at one of the Microfests. And he knew somewhere in Italy where there was an organ, but he still hasn't told me where it is.
I've looked online, but when you type mean tone, of course you get quarter comma.
Okay.
I haven't found a third comma organ.
Yeah, but there must be.
There's harpsichord, of course. Sorry.
Yeah,
but an organ would be great, trumpet and organ,
Yeah. Very classical.
Yeah.
Or classical combination.